Hi, good morning and good morning and then so it's like the Packers front office, what's going on with that? Are they a real front office? Is that a real group of people? I looked them up. I was looking at their names. I don't know. Mark Murphy, Ed Policy. That one's probably made up. His name is Ed Policy, so that one's probably seeing is that it's hard to imagine that there's anybody like actually making decisions in there or like trying to choose something or like direct the organization in any particular direction. It's kind of hard to say that Ed Policy is a real guy. So I'm going to write him off as not being real. Paul Baniel. Well, that's not a real guy because they're like, well, we can't do Daniel because that's, so let's just put a B. Paul Baniel. So Paul Baniel's not a real guy. Craig Benzel, not a real guy. They're like, their first idea was like, well, what if we called him Craig Pretzel? But that was the name of one of the, because that's just like the name of a guy who works at a front office is what they were trying to do, and they're like trying to project fake names to fill their front office administration since they didn't have one. So isn't their front office, isn't it just supposed to be the city of Green Bay? Like, why didn't their website should list every person who lives in Green Bay? Jerry Waters, Lisa Patterson, Craig Benzel. So they're like, well, what if his name was Craig Pretzel? And they're like, well, no, let's just make it Benzel. That's more believable. Gabrielle Valdez Dow, Nicole Ledvina, Jason Wallers, Jerry Hansen, Patricia Scott, Rhonda Borowicz, Marissa Melly, Mary Bartles, Julie Leung, and Bob Harlan. And Bob Harlan is the chairman emeritus. And that's administration. Football operations. Russ Ball. Their first idea is like, what if we named him Football? Daryl Franklin, Greg Rugemer, Adam Corzin. So a bunch of made up people that would have to. So like, what goes into a decision like that? Picking Jordan Love? What goes through? How does that happen? How do you arrive at that? It's 2020, and literally every single other team in the NFL has gotten their shit together at least somewhat, so as to pick somebody who makes somewhat sense to the outside world. Like, it used to be the Vikings that would make picks that were just like, oh, they fucked that one up because they're the Vikings. We can count on them for one of those every once in a while. Like, they're just like, oh, that's a total waste of a pick. And sometimes they would, like, they forgot one year or something. They didn't turn it in time. They forgot. They were like, oh, wait. Oh, that was this morning. They forgot. They showed up. They were like the 7th pick, but they showed up 2 hours late. And they're like, oh, so they didn't make it. There's that. Remember that year the Vikings didn't even show up and then they lost all their picks? So it's like, but the Vikings used to do that maybe about 10 years ago. And there are some teams that used to, it's just like, oh, you could tell even as a fan that that's just like a waste of a pick, even if you didn't do that much research on the players. Like there's some teams that used to do that. The Packers usually traditionally just get like whatever standard defensive player is on the board. And apparently they haven't drafted an offensive player in the first round since 2012. So that just goes to show why they haven't won a Super Bowl since 2012 is because they have this strange mentality where they think that Aaron Rodgers will just do all of the extra work and then save them and go to the Super Bowl. They think that Rodgers will, they just think they're okay with making it as hard on themselves as possible. The Packers front office, the Packers organization, and really the Packers fan base, because the Packers fan base hasn't done any work putting heat on the front office. So the Packers fan base is also to blame why the Packers arrive at deciding Jordan Love. Like, that's the fan base being too considerate of the front office through the years and being not confrontational enough. Like, too much save face-ness of the Packers fan base and just a limited imagination. Just entirely, the organization is most defined by their limited imagination, that they can't imagine they don't even have the words to describe CeeDee Lamb. Like Henry Ruggs isn't even in their vocabulary. Like they don't have the comprehension of a wide receiver that's that talented, because the Packers, I mean, I feel like the front office would change some things up if they received some more heat, but they don't. Nobody complains that much. Like it took us 40 years to overthrow Ted Thompson and we hated him forever. And they pick Jordan Love because they're like, well, 15 years ago on this day, like 15 years ago in this very draft, we picked Aaron Rodgers 21st, and look what happened. It worked out, and we're gonna do it the same way, the Packers way. We're gonna groom this guy for 4 years or whatever. Like it's the Packers way, like it's a tradition that they're trying to uphold. Remember the tradition of getting Aaron Rodgers 21st overall? We're going to get this guy that was passed up on, except like what an entirely different situation. And this guy, who knows how talented he is, and this isn't a quarterback that was supposed to be picked in the top 5 and then fell to you at 21. And also when you drafted Aaron Rodgers, it's not like you had in mind before the draft that you wanted to draft him. It's not like Ted Thompson made a smart decision in getting him. Apparently it worked out, but most of the time, quarterbacks that fall that are like near the end of the first round or after that, like they're probably going to be career backups or busts. If you're a quarterback that makes it to the top 20, like the likelihood is much more that it's not going to work out for you because you weren't one of the elite quarterbacks to be drafted in the top 15. Like there's a reason he would have fallen to 30 and he fell to 25 or whatever. Like the Packers out-asked ESPN, which should have been impossible. They out-asked ESPN last night when ESPN delivered the worst broadcast of a sporting event that maybe I've ever seen. People say that if you're trying to be a sports analyst or something, you always say stuff like that just to be dramatic. Like that's the worst thing I've ever seen. That was one of the worst like live TV events ever. And it happened now. It happened when we've had so much time, when through the years, like television programming and production, like we've had so much time to figure out the formula to get like a live performance right through TV in general, like society, or our relationship to TV and producing it, like, and it just shows how incompetent ESPN is, that they just throw Roger Goodell up there when he has a no charisma personality. And it's like, what is Roger Goodell doing in life? What is he up there doing? Why is he because isn't it kind of the thing that we always want to fire him? There is one year where everybody hated him a ton so that we could raise enough noise that he'd have to step down, but he survived it. But he survived it to do what? Continue to be bad at his job, like continue to he's always making weird speeches in different places when like primarily in an NFL commissioner, like I feel like one of the main skill sets is to be a good public speaker, but apparently he's not that. And also he wants to continue being the NFL and make an ass of himself in public appearances. And he signs up for this thing as a live performance with ESPN. I mean, it's not so much that he signed up for it. Obviously, Disney pulled some strings, and they're like, what if we had the commissioner up there because they need... I mean, in their head, they just pictured it a certain way, and once they had pictured it that way, they weren't going to go back on what they... about the dream that they envisioned because of their Disney fantasyism and whatever. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with ESPN? And here's the next point I'm making, which is... of what's wrong with ESPN. And this one really cuts deep. It's going to challenge your thoughts about what it means for ESPN to produce a show. You're going to be like, oh, they lined up the programming this way. It must be because of no, I'm just exaggerating. I'm making fun of myself. ESPN, like, their Disney stuff, like Tua Tagovailoa, they're like, Oh, oh man, we love him. Why is his family wearing Hawaii stuff? Who is in charge of that? Did Disney tell them to wear that? I'm assuming that they did. Disney's like, hey, why don't you all wear traditional Hawaiian leis so that we can make, like, whose idea was that? How ridiculous that looked? Like, isn't that cultural appropriation on behalf vicariously from Disney? Like that you're making them, why, unless it was the family's decision, the family like wanted to do that just because they're like, oh, maybe that would be I don't know, but the family didn't seem to look too happy, and nobody was too happy because nobody on their cameras, like all these players, when they were figuring out, if you didn't see the NFL draft, when all the players figured out that they were picked, and then they showed them at their home, like none of them were happy, and I think it's because Disney was doing some voodoo where they were the ESPN camera crews that were there were doing some voodoo where they were telling all the players to like act a certain way and really show the tears and the emotion, because Disney feels like during the coronavirus that they need to ramp up the tears and the emotion, and probably maybe part of it is that they're losing money, so they feel more pressure to ramp up the dream of the vision that they have of the specific way that we're all supposed to be united with each other, and they want to, like, they feel more pressure to make everything even more a presentation than they normally do, when already the presentation level of it, the theatrical production level of emotional connectedness that they're outputting is already at Mach 5. Like, they don't know how to stop. They're just accelerating incessantly towards like everybody having some sort of emotional breakdown. Like, in their perfect world, all the broadcasters would be crying like every hour on the hour during the broadcast to find something, like crying about something about one of the players' emotional stories or whatever. I'm just saying that, like, ESPN was making the players do something. It seemed like to me, it seemed like they were making their families react a specific way, and that all the families were annoyed by it, because I've seen a lot of NFL drafts, and in every single other one, the family just celebrates when the call comes in. But all of these families were pissed off about something, and I think it's because ESPN was telling them to react a specific way, because that's what Disney's going to tell you to do, because they don't want you to be in control of your, like, they're not going to try to they're not going to allow it to be up to you, because there's money on the line, so they're going to try to make it happen the exact right way, and they're just a bunch of assholes. Like, but the Packers managed to do something so stupid that even ESPN was able to make fun of the Packers, when ESPN, like, there's no worse look for them than that broadcast. And I don't know if you saw it, but Roger Goodell, like, they have Roger Goodell making all the picks or whatever, and then they have on the screen, the whole thing was just a circus, really. But like behind the screen behind him, they have, for every team that's about to draft, like he's announcing the draft pick for each team, they have those teams' fans in like a Zoom whatever, where they're all like in there, where there's like 15 boxes or whatever on the screen, and all the fans are in the different tiny boxes, and they're just yelling. And the idea is that they're like supposed to boo the commissioner, but none of them are booing, and Roger Goodell is trying to ramp up the enthusiasm, but he's entirely unsuccessful at it, and he's also a bad speaker, and they keep cutting to him while he's talking to the cameraman. And they keep cutting to him while he's like mid-conversation with whoever's telling him to stand in the right place. Like, just a terrible production. And then they have Roger Goodell like do an interview with Joe Burrow. And the interview went something like, "Oh, Joe, are you excited?" And Joe Burrow's like, "Oh, yeah, so excited." And Roger Goodell's like, "Yeah, how's it feel? Are you excited?" And Joe Burrow's like, can't wait. And then it just cut away while they were still talking to each other back at the ESPN 5 that they have manipulating the broadcast to tell you that everyone from the SEC is really good. The ESPN 5, the college football analyst team that's had the most experience in telling you that everybody from Alabama and LSU is good. that team, they've had the most experience in telling you that. So that's the team that, but obviously that's why they buy the rights to the NFL draft anyway, is because they want to manipulate the process even further and tell you the speciality and supernaturalness of the SEC players, like even as they're sending them off. They want a good send-off for them. Like they want the dream to continue. They want to control the identity, dream, and vision of each SEC player as long as they possibly can. They want to manipulate the narration on them as the public sees them as long as they can. So they're like, let's get the NFL draft too, and then we'll get more NFL, and it's just going to be this pathway of greatness, like how the SEC established a glorious reign and 1 year and became the most dominant conference, and that's the only conference you want to be in. And then and they send all these players to the NFL, and really the NFL is energized primarily just by the SEC. Like I'm just saying, I'm envisioning now a world if ESPN and Disney took over more of the NFL. Like I guess if that's kind of the Nazism, like the fascist 1,000-year deal for them, like if they took over all of it, and then just to implant this vision of that the SEC is the Aryan race or whatever, because that seems to be what they're doing, or what they're on a that's what they're always trying to get, that what they're and then you see what they're doing, and then of course then they got those shows where they got, and then an analyst says, and then somebody But so they're doing, because of ESPN, you know what ESPN is doing, obviously. But the Packers arrived at a place in their long and storied history yesterday where they drafted Jordan Love, 25th overall. And the thing is that an idiot, unknown call, or make it stop. The thing is that here's like an average person, the average person in that draft, like the average Packers fan, if they were deciding who was getting drafted, they would have waited until the draft went to 30, and then they would have taken the best wide receiver on the board. They would have waited till 30 and then been like, oh, Denzel Sims or Mims or whatever, or whoever, T. Higgins, even though we would rather have Mims from Baylor. Whoever was on the board, the average fan would have been like, oh yeah, we need a wide receiver. That's what we're projected to take. Obviously, we need a wide receiver. Everybody in the organization knows that. Quite obviously, like that's the main complaint. We need a wide receiver, and we haven't done anything in the offseason except draft Devin Funchess. Like the Packers, you watched, like, this front office that made this pick, did they watch the NFC Championship game last year? Like, they saw San Francisco win the game by 1 billion points with Jimmy Garoppolo only throwing 7 passes. And then they're like, and then here's what they're like. They see San Francisco jump ahead to get San Francisco trades for like the 25th pick to get the best wide receiver still available, Brandon Ayuk, which the Packers didn't even consider doing that until, I mean, they're probably like, oh, what if we trade a pick to get our guy? Is that possible? And then they're like, they saw San Francisco do it, and they're like, oh, I guess we can do that too. Why don't we try to do that? I'm not sure that they realized before San Francisco did that they could actually trade their pick and try to get a better pick. Because, I mean, the average Packer fan would have waited till 30 and taken who was best available. Somebody who was like a competent, shrewd decision-making front office would have done everything in their power to get either CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, or Jerry Jeudy. Like, and that, it's not like that's out of the question. Because there were some trades that happened around that area, like 13, 14, there are some people willing to trade a pick. Or, I mean, you could have offered a high trade price, like a number of draft picks or whatever, just to get up. Like, you could have offered, I would have offered, if I was in that position, I would have offered the next year's first round pick for one of those. I mean, maybe not that high, but something. Like, I would have offered something to get either CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, or Jerry Jeudy, because that's priority number one. Because if you get one of those three players, you automatically have a very good chance of winning the Super Bowl, because your main hole is wide receiver, and if Rodgers has Devontae Adams and then a CeeDee Lamb to throw to, game over. You already won 13 games without a good receiving core and the oldest tight end. You already won 13 games with that. If you had CeeDee Lamb, like that'd be the main priority. I would have done anything in my power to trade up. Like seriously, if I was in that position, I mean, I would have gotten Amari Cooper. I would have gotten a receiver. I would have gotten receivers a long time ago. I've been complaining about them getting receivers forever. But yeah, so it's like so the average fan waits till 30, picks the best wide receiver available, Denzel Mims, or whoever, Jerry McJudy, if he's still available, or Henry Ruggs Jr., or whoever still. If Henry Ruggs McJudy is still on the board, then they draft him, or whoever is on the average fan drafts the best wide receiver on the board at 30. They just wait. The average fan. That's the average fan. The average fan. An idiot would wait until 30 and then draft Jordan Love. Somebody who gets paid a ton of money to be a front office person and make whoever gets paid the money to actually make that decision, like the Green Bay Packers front office. Only an office that gets paid a ton of money to do their job well can do a job badly enough that they actually trade something to get up higher in the draft to get Jordan Love. Because not only do you have the penalty of incurring Jordan Love, and now he's on your team, a liability right out of the gate. Like, not only do you have liability for the next 2 years right out of the gate, but you gave something away to get him. Like, you really thought, what were you worried about? How do you assess the value of that commodity, Jordan Love? How did they evaluate that? Like, what decision, what stood out in their minds? And the answer is nothing stood out in their minds about Jordan Love. They probably put as much thought into that as they did when they drafted Aaron Rodgers. Because when they drafted Aaron Rodgers, you know that Ted Thompson was just like, well, he was supposed to be in the top 5 and he fell to us, so he's pretty good, right? Probably regardless of what position he played. Like, they're like, well, I guess, well, and he is that good, and well, I guess we'll be out of it. We won't have Brett Favre forever, so it's not like he was a mastermind thinking years down the road. And you're lucky that Aaron Rodgers worked out. And Jordan Love isn't going to be as good as Aaron Rodgers. And you're just trying to uphold the tradition of when you drafted Aaron Rodgers, you think it's going to be the same thing or something like that, when everybody knows Jordan Love isn't going to be as good as Aaron Rodgers. And even if he is as good as Aaron Rodgers, like, hopefully he's not, for his sake, because if he's as good as Aaron Rodgers, they're never going to try to get a wide receiver to put around him. They're never going to try to build an offense around him, apparently, as long as it's the Packers organization. They're going to try to make Jordan Love the hero to save all of us and then put it on. Because Aaron Rodgers already engages in this weird hero mentality about everything. That just like the Packers fans, or his relationship to the organization has thrown on him. But it's just the Packers' limited imagination, like the organization's limited imagination, that they think that they're not going to go out of their way to try to get more help. Like, when it's easy to get help, they're going to try to do everything themselves and say that it's more difficult. But more importantly, they're just subscribing to some sort of mentality that causes them to always stay with what's familiar to them. Like, I think the Packers is the only organization that they're like, that we're going to be like, oh, if you were that they're going to say that it's a big deal if you make it into the Packers Hall of Fame, because they're the Packers, because of Lambeau Field. They're kind of like the Chicago Cubs, except the Chicago Cubs have the dignity to go 100 years without winning a championship. Like, you're the Chicago Cubs, so you just stick with your over Lambeau Field, but we win a Super Bowl. It's just that you would have to have a limited imagination to not expand your horizons so as to say that, oh, what would Mike Evans look like on our team? Like, you don't even comprehend that or think, but a limited imagination in that they apparently just want to project a team that's old and based in tradition only. Like they only want, even though there's like 25 to 30 years where nobody cared about the Packers at all and they were just a running joke or something like that. They went through as many quarterbacks as the Browns go through, like in the 80s, when it's just like, so I'm saying if you were, but not that I know, I don't know what way people evaluated the Packers in the 80s and 90s because I wasn't watching them. But like, yeah, what if Jordan Love is as good as Aaron Rodgers? Wouldn't that be great so that we can waste another generational talent his whole career, give him one Super Bowl? If Jordan Love is as good as Aaron Rodgers, he won't win a Super Bowl either, probably. Like Aaron Rodgers is still lucky to have won one Super Bowl. I think management made better decisions back then. I don't know management. It seems like management is less competent now. I mean, they have to be. They're less competent now than whatever people we had in 2011 when they actually had people for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. Like, it appears that they're not going to give Jordan Love any semblance of wide receivers because they can't imagine that a wide receiver is a valuable position or differentiate the skill set of one wide receiver to another. Like, what happens at the draft combine for the Packers? Who do the Packers send out there? It's just like a team of somebody's dads, like that they send out there. It's either people's dads or like representatives from the first two Packers who played on the defensive line in like the first two Super Bowl teams that the Packers won, that they just like send out there. And then, but like whoever the Packers send out there, they probably think that you're supposed to like keep score or that it's some sort of competitive event. Like they don't even know. They're like, oh, that guy hit the most, like he's winning the competition. And then they're like, whoever the receivers are, the Packers at the combine, they're just like tallying how many catches they make. And that's the extent of their evaluation of like what's good. Well, we saw Henry Ruggs catch 8 of 9. And then Jerry Jeudy caught all 7. But because they're just like tallying, oh, they're just trying to see if he caught it or not. I mean, that might be as far as they've been able to imagine what a receiver does, is that he just, wow, that guy can catch a ball. Like that's what they're looking for in a receiver, I think, is what it seems like. Oh, that guy can really catch a ball. Like, but I mean, you have the Packers have the limited imagination of saying that the archetype of a wide receiver is a not Hall of Fame receiver. Because the archetype of wide receivers to the Green Bay Packers fan base and management is Donald Driver, and he didn't make the Hall of Fame. You know, he was a first ballot Packer Hall of Famer. And so that's kind of where we see his value as a great Packer, not as a great player, like because of whatever is blocking the minds of the front office from seeing that there's talented people that you can acquire to win more than one Super Bowl per 20 years with a generational talent quarterback or whatever. Like, and I'll say this to Packer fans all the time, but Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest deep ball throwers ever. Like, he throws it so fast, like his line drive passes that get there before the safety does, like on a long pass, like a line drive to the sideline. The pass is thrown so fast that it gets there before the safety does, and like pretty much nobody has ever been able to do that. I mean, just a couple people do that. Like consistently. Like that's just what, like his line drive passes, how fast he throws the ball, the trajectory of the passes he throws is different from the trajectory of other quarterbacks' passes. And so he's one of the greatest deep ball throwers ever. And the best that you've ever been able to give to him in his entire career is a walk-on from Kansas State. Because there's no Mike Evans if you're the Packers. There's Donald Driver. That's the ceiling. A guy who is good after the catch and is a good catcher of the ball. A guy who gets open and catches the ball. It's not like Donald Driver was particularly tall. He wasn't Calvin Johnson. He's just a very, very good receiver. And that's as best as you can even imagine. Like the Packers, in their heads, the front office is just like, what if we got somebody like Donald Driver? I mean, to them, and they're like, well, we could draft 12 more 6th and 7th round wide receivers this year, and one of them is bound to turn out somewhat like Donald Driver. And then Packers fans see Geronimo Allison catch a 20-yard pass, and they think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. More so than any other NFL team, any other fan base's reaction to a guy catching a pass. And I feel like it just stems back to this relationship that we have with Donald Driver when we used to see him catch passes. Because apparently before Donald Driver was an above par receiver in front of you, you didn't realize that above par receivers were a thing. And so now the Packers, like, we see Geronimo Allison catch a ball, and we think that doesn't happen everywhere. Like the Packers fan, like, we think that other teams don't have secondary wide receivers that catch passes all the time. Like, a pass completion is romanticized way more on the Packers than it is on other teams. Seriously, sensationalized. That Rodgers completes a pass, that he does that, is a bigger deal on the Packers, and that's part of the limited imagination of not saying that there's better people for him to throw to, because you keep making Aaron Rodgers out to be this hero, that you keep making him out to be a hero that completes passes when he's a quarterback. Like, of course he's good enough to do that. And like, there's people in the NFL you could have, if you just had the Rams receiving core, you'd probably win a Super Bowl. I mean, if you had somebody good. But the Packers front office, they're like, oh, we got a couple players on the cheap. Like, oh, we got Devin Funchess. He hasn't played in the last 18 months. And even when he does play, he's a second-rate receiver. That should fill the gap that we have. And so when they got Devin Funchess, everybody who's interested in the offseason moves that the Packers are making, they're all like, I mean, naively, apparently, myself included, we're like, oh, that's just like, oh, they got Devin Funchess, so they're kind of on their way to getting receivers, and he's going to be like a number 3. Devin Funchess can be a number 3 receiver, that's fine. And then you're going to draft somebody really good, or maybe get one of the receivers, because there's a bunch of receivers in free agency. You could get like Amari Cooper or Odell Beckham or whoever, like a number of people rumored to be available. Like, oh, they're on the pathway to getting receivers. But apparently they're not, because they haven't had one imaginative thought since the Packers lost the NFC Championship game. They haven't geared one thought towards the product that will be on the field in 2020, if they're on the field. They haven't thought about what that team's going to look like, because it doesn't matter to them, because they're off in some dream world where the Packers will be good in 3 years or whatever. I mean, who knows? There's no thinking that goes into that decision. It's the most unimaginative, that you don't realize that you couldn't have just gotten somebody good for this year. You really think that that's the way to go, is just to tell the entire fan base right now that the next 2 years are out the door, like, and that Aaron Rodgers' career is over, and let's plan for the future. Like, they don't even they don't have the capacity to understand what it represents, that in drafting him and saying that you're saying that Rodgers' career is over, because you're saying that it's not worth investing in the last few years of his career to try to win a Super Bowl now. You think that you can win. Apparently they think they can win a Super Bowl with Jordan Love. They think that they're more likely to win a Super Bowl with Jordan Love than Aaron Rodgers, is what they're saying, when Jordan Love is an instant liability who isn't going to play for 2 years or whatever. Like, he's not Joel Embiid. You don't draft somebody like that with, who drafts a quarterback that isn't going to play for 2 years? Like, regardless, who does that? Only the Packers could do something that stupid to not. You could have gotten Zach Bond. Zach Bond was going to maybe go towards the end of the first round, and that might have been a reach or whatever, but he would have been good. He probably would have gotten you some sacks. You could have used Zach Bond. You could have gotten a linebacker, just whoever whoever was next on the board, if you were really apparent, since you were considering Jordan Love and you zeroed in on Jordan Love so much so that you're like, that's our guy. We're going to go to 25 to get Jordan Love. Like, you zeroed in on him. You premeditated picking this guy, Jordan Love. There's nobody who thinks that he's necessarily going to be good. But you could have just taken the safety, you're going up to pick 25th after San Francisco builds their way to the Super Bowl perfectly, adds to the machine that they already have built. Like, you're light years behind San Francisco, Green Bay. Light years. Do you know what they're doing? It's not even a comparison. Like, picking Jordan Love, it's worse than that you picked Jordan Love. It's that we see that the Packers are in this fatalistic mindset in the present day where they think that picking Jordan Love is a good decision when any other NFL team and any average fan knows that that's a stupid pick. Like, if I'm any other NFL team, I'm like, oh, well, that's one wasted pick. I don't have to worry about them taking somebody that I liked. Like, that's just a wasted pick, obviously. It's that the Packers are probably not going to be good for the next 5 years if we're going to have to take the time to filter out all these people in the front office that are nobodies, because that's what they are. There's no counter argument to this. I mean, yeah, you can provide the counter argument. Oh, what's all the hate about? Why don't we let Jordan Love prove himself? Okay, well, let's wait 3 years and for that to happen is the point. I can't wait for 4 years when we finally get to see if there's a counter argument to it. You have to wait 2 years to have a counter argument, apparently. And there's no, the point is, they don't know how to make a decision, these people. Whoever they're sending to the combine, whatever talent, I don't know what the semblance of the structure of talent scouts that the Packers send out is, but they're not distinguishing one player from another player. If you're zeroing in, there's no imagination that went into, you probably didn't do any work, like laziness, didn't do any work that you're zeroing in on Jordan Love. You're like, well, if he falls to us, we're going to take him automatically. We might even trade up for him. But as long as he's available, we're taking Jordan Love. You know how irresponsible that is? That you're not trying to compare your different positional needs, or they didn't run any sort of evaluation on what needs that they have besides just numbers wise, we have 3 tight ends and you're supposed to have 4. That's probably what they think about. They're like, well, we're supposed to have 5 defensive tackles. We only have 3. So let's see what defensive tackles have been injured for the entire last year so we can get them really cheap, because we're not going to spend any money because we're cheap, because we don't imagine ourselves to be great. We just imagine ourselves to be that goes in. You picked Jordan Love, you could have picked a linebacker, you could have picked anyone, but they didn't consider that. I don't know what they're considering. I wonder what the rest of this draft looks like. Hopefully they're probably going to get some wide receivers on the back end of it. But they will apparently always miss the point as long as it's this group of people managing it. We'll have to wait 5 years for this management to be over with and for Jordan Love to go away. I can't wait till they get rid of Jordan Love at this point, because seriously, it doesn't matter. If he's successful, it's not like they made a good decision. I would still say the same thing. There's nothing redeeming about that decision, because it reveals that they have no imagination whatsoever. And that's exactly what their offense is. And Matt LaFleur, you pick Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur is a nobody. He didn't win you any games last year. Matt LaFleur, if he had any influence over this decision at all, he is a nobody. Because you don't, I'm just saying. You just throw a line out in the middle of the ocean, and you just wait for it to bob back for the tide to bring it back to your boat, and then hope for there to be fish hope for it to have caught something when you didn't pay attention to it the entire time it was floating out there. That's what your Jordan Love pick is. You're like, oh, hopefully it brings in something. We're just going to throw this out, and it's just like 3 years later, we'll see if it works out. We'll make this decision here, and then we'll go. That you don't know. Like Jimmy Graham, why'd you get rid of Jimmy Graham if he's still going to be your second best passing? He's still the second best passing option on the team if they had kept him to this point. Seriously, he still is somehow, even though they got rid of him. So now they have a worse receiving core than they had last year when they had the worst receiving core in the NFL. And you are the worst receiving core in the NFL if you're the only team that it's like an embarrassment when you play on a national stage like the NFC Championship game and you only have one person to throw to. That's an embarrassment to everybody else because everybody else would look at that and be like, how did the Packers even arrive here when there's only one person even there? Like, hopefully Devontae Adams gets open, or else, oh well, there's no other. Maybe Jimmy Graham can get 2 inches of separation. I think the Packers' ideal receiver is just somebody who runs the same route as the corner or sticks on the corner really well, gets no separation at all. I think that's the kind of receiver that they're looking for, or a guy that drops passes. Yeah, maybe they can get, like, as long as they're keeping Martez Valdez-Scantling around, then I guess they're kind of doing their job of filling the Packers receiving core with no names, people that don't remember to put 2 feet in the end zone when they're running towards the back of it, or like drag a foot, or they just think that they're running so fast that there's no time to get a foot down because they're not a talented wide receiver ultimately, like they're a 7th round draft pick. There's a difference, Packers GM front office, between a 7th round draft pick wide receiver and a 1st round draft pick wide receiver. I don't think they know the value of a draft pick, though. I think when the draft comes, they're like, well, hopefully what a nice opportunity. We'll get some new players in here. They probably just view it practically like, oh, we lost some players due to retirement and free agency. Now we can get some more. Because whatever way that they send people to the combine and they're like, oh, they're just like checking off. I think that whoever the Packers send to the combine, they're just like checking off boxes of the players, like all the stations that the players go through. They're like, oh, they did the run, and then now they're going to go and catch passes. Now they're going to jump and hit all the things to move them over, jump as high as they can and hit as many of those things. They're just like checking off boxes to be like, oh yeah, they did that, and now they're going off to the next thing, and then they report back to whoever. They're like, yeah, we went there and all the players did all of the tasks, because I don't think they see anything different one player to the next or know how to evaluate it. And they're like, oh, quarterback is good. Isn't that the best player? Like, that's the level of stupidity that you would have to have. You're like, oh, quarterback's good. You need a quarterback always, right? That's as far ahead as they've thought about it, is the point. That's why the only thing they can fill their heads with to draft is a good quarterback, and then they fetishize it so much and get really antsy when one is available, when the quarterback you have is near the end of his career, because they're like, oh, draft another quarterback. Apparently that's the only thing that we know constitutes an NFL team, is a quarterback. I don't know that they realize that other positions have value. Like, do they know what the 49ers are doing? The 49ers moved ahead of the Packers because the 49ers were going to draft 31st. They moved ahead of the Packers to get Brandon Ayuk, partly so that the Packers wouldn't get him, because if the Packers get Ayuk, then they have greatly increased their chances of being successful in the following year. But so San Francisco underestimated the Packers' stupidity in that they traded something away to move ahead of them and draft Brandon Ayuk. I mean, it's not the only reason. It's not like they did that just to screw the Packers. They needed a wide receiver, and Ayuk is if you're anywhere near that, of course you're going to trade up to get Ayuk. That's what any rational team would do. And the 49ers are going to do that because they are at least somewhat intelligent. But the 49ers are so far ahead of the Packers, and the Packers don't even care. The Packers aren't like considering how they can bridge the gap between them and other NFL franchises, and that gap is very wide because the Packers don't care about modern offenses. They don't realize what it means to have a high octane offense. They're not concerned about having a high octane offense, like looking anything like the Chiefs or having a good receiving core. When that's priority number one, the over defense is if you just get a receiving core that looks like Tampa Bay's, then I mean, if that's all you have to do, if you're already winning 13 games without that, then your defense is good enough that they're going to stick around. If you're already winning 13 games without that, like you could have a high octane offense. You could fill the receiving positions with great receivers. And even if the Packers didn't win a Super Bowl, it would be like one of the greatest shows on turf or whatever. It would be competing with what the Chiefs are doing, because the Chiefs are the most fun to watch team in the NFL because of all the weapons that they have offensively. You could at least be a fun team to watch, even if you're worried about like the drawbacks that you're not getting other positions. But apparently you're not worried about drafting a receiver and then missing out on a defensive player, because you're drafting Jordan Love, a quarterback, when the only thing you already have is a quarterback. And you're saying that, and so you're like, well, Rodgers' career is over. Do you know that Rodgers is the best quarterback that you're going to get now until Trevor Lawrence isn't as good as Aaron Rodgers? Like, even if you could try to get Trevor Lawrence, but like you're not going to get Trevor Lawrence or somebody like, well, you might get Trevor Lawrence because he's a quarterback, and apparently the Packers understand a talented quarterback, but not a talented any other position. So it's not like the Packers are like, oh, well, we don't want to miss out on, because it's not like they're considering that they don't know how to stop the run, and so that's why they didn't draft a receiver. It's not like they're like, oh, because you know what? You need a linebacker just as much as you need a receiver, but a receiver would fill the void of receiver and then also make you more flashy. Like, there's value in being flashy. Like, you can also like attract other players if you have a high octane offense and be an interesting place to play and like you grow your brand that way. You make more money. You're more interesting. You're something that the NFL is surrounding more. Apparently the Packers don't want anybody to look at them because they want to draft backup quarterbacks in the first round. Another backup. Like, it's not that great a decision no matter what to draft a backup quarterback. Why don't you wait till the year that you need one like everybody else does? You're the only team that drafts a backup quarterback. Everybody else is like, oh, we need a quarterback, and then they draft one. And sometimes they don't even do that. The Packers, the only thing that they understand is a quarterback, apparently. And they're not like, did you watch that San Francisco ran the ball for an entire game? I don't know that an NFL team in a playoff game has been able to get by having the ratio of runs to passes be that high since maybe 1970. Like, that an NFL team can get by just running the ball today, when everybody, like, if you watch the NFL last year, like, everybody's just catching on to like, well, what you got to do to stop the run. Like, every defense had a better game plan last year about stopping the run or whatever. At least they figured it out somewhat, but that kind of thing ebbs and flows. And then like 2 years from now, they'll be worse at stopping the run probably. But like last year, everybody seemed to have figured it out, or like whatever level of development happened that they're able to make their strategies better for stopping the run. Like, every NFL team was able to do that, but like the Packers aren't in tune with the way that the NFL changes and adapts, and so they're not up to date on whatever strategy that everybody else is taking on to stop the run. They'll probably arrive at it a year after everybody else does because of their limited imagination. And they'll probably arrive at the fact that of the value of a wide receiver. I mean, people realize that it's important to have really great wide receivers now more than ever before. And like, it was a great wide receiver class, yeah, but you're drafting more and more wide receivers in the first round than ever before, and you're replacing wide receivers with first round running back draft picks because everybody knows that wide receivers are more valuable. But the Packers haven't realized that yet. They don't understand the value of having a lot of weapons on offense, and it's not like they're trying to fill in their defense, and that's why they didn't take a weapon on offense. Like, why don't you at least get a linebacker? Like, how are you that stupid? Any idiot Packer fan would have gotten a linebacker because it's isn't it the most fundamental thing in the last 60 years of football to know how to stop the run, and you can't do that. And so maybe you should devote some resources to doing that, because if you play San Francisco again, do you think San Francisco's going to pass the ball 40 times when they already had the game plan last year to run, when they didn't even know for sure that would work, and it did work, and they're intelligent enough to know that, they would, if you play San Francisco again, they're just going to run the ball at you again, and they're going to win, and Jimmy Garoppolo's going to throw 3 passes, and that's how far ahead of you that they are. The 49ers, in terms of intelligence, the 49ers are like SEAL Team 6, and the Packers are the Revolutionary War redcoats. The Packers are the redcoats, and the 49ers are the modern day American military, is what you're dealing with, Green Bay. That's the gap you're dealing with. Seriously. The 49ers are okay, we need this position here and this position. We're going to fill this position. They drafted another defensive tackle to start off with, and then still got one of the best wide receivers in the draft. They still filled when they already have better wide receivers than the Packers. And also they're willing to make a move mid-season for a good wide receiver. They had they have equivalent. They at least fill all the positions of wide receiver with people that are wide receivers capable of catching a ball. That are talented wide receivers. San Francisco is interested in acquiring talented wide receivers. They're interested in doing that. The Packers are not interested in acquiring talented wide receivers. They're interested in drafting backup quarterbacks. But the San Francisco 49ers, they're and so they draft another defensive tackle or whatever in the first round because they're our defensive front line wasn't good enough. We're going to be so dominant. We're going to create something so dominant up front defensively that nobody will be able to handle it. They're already there, besides the fact that every single other piece is already filled in for them. The Packers have every piece not filled in for them, and they're still able to make an NFC Championship game just because of Aaron Rodgers. But you're going to get obliterated by the 49ers because the 49ers are just going to run the ball when you don't even know how to do something as fundamental as try to stop the run, or see that when you're one of the worst teams in rush defense, that you're supposed to try to improve that. Do you know that the offseason Packers front office is for improving your team? Or do you know that it's for making the team better, or seeing that there's weaknesses in your defense or offense? I don't think that they know that. I don't think that they realize. I think that they just think that there's players to get, because that's the level of stupidity. Because they're not. Are these people even fans of the game? Have they watched that much NFL that they know what to look for in a player? Or I know that I'm exaggerating it, but I'm not really, because their stupidity level. The average idiot fan, not a Packer fan, would be well, what would be a normal thing to do in this situation? It would be to wait till 30 and then draft somebody who will play next year. Why don't you draft someone who plays next year? Why don't you start there, front office? Do you know that you have to put a team on the field next year? I don't know that they know that. You could play. An idiot fan would at least try to make it so that reality was normal to They would try to do something that other people were able to accept or other people would imagine a front office would do in that situation. The average idiot fan would try to at least replicate a reality of normalcy where the Packers drafted Xavier McKinney, a safety from Alabama or something. But the Packers front office especially inept at what they do. It's more so than that. I mean, it doesn't end like there's no, it doesn't end what I say about the Packers like it's not an argument. It doesn't, if Jordan Love works out, it doesn't matter. It's so far down the road. The Packers don't live in the present. They don't live in reality at all. They're front office. Who are these people? How did they get in this position? How do they get in this position? How did they manage to make themselves look stupider than ESPN? ESPN's broadcast, like, your archetype for a wide receiver is a not Hall of Fame receiver, and that's the whole point. You don't know what's happening with CeeDee Lamb's talent. You're not like, oh, he's a fast receiver. They don't even know what a fast breakaway deep threat receiver is, somebody who's talented, of blue chip, whatever the phrase is, like 5-star athlete from high school to college to first round draft pick receiver. They don't even know what that is. They're not. And like, oh, what's really stupid is that a week ago, the Buccaneers got Gronkowski, and so OJ Howard, their other tight end, their best tight end available, is presumably on the trading block. And I was thinking like, oh, I hope that the Packers get OJ Howard. That would be perfect. He would be a perfect fit for the Packers. But then you see that they drafted Jordan Love, and then you realize, oh, they actually have nothing going on in their brains, these people that are making these decisions. And so they didn't even consider what OJ Howard would look like on the Packers, let alone that they like made a call over there, that they're trying to talk with the Buccaneers, that they're like, oh, a tight end is available and we need exactly a tight end. They're not thinking that. They're like, well, we have this other guy on our team that was a walk-on at Idaho University. He's a converted linebacker from Penn, and we're going to hope that he works out at tight end. And nobody's heard of him before, but he's the future at tight end and the reason for that is because he's already on the team. Well, he made the roster, so he's an NFL player, right? That's how the Packers deal with how they're going to replace the positions. Well, they're like, oh, well, and then if they get somebody that's too talented, like Micah Hyde's showing some promise, and they're like, well, I don't know, maybe we should tone it down a little bit. I think that we're starting to get good or something, like they get rid of people that are showing promise. But yeah, aren't they? I mean, it seems like they're probably just going to try to make it work. They might draft a tight end. I hope that they don't, because now you have to gear all of your draft picks towards wide receivers and linebackers the rest of the way now that you wasted the most important one. Like, don't do a tight end then. But so what I'm saying is that it is naive of me to think that the Packers might get OJ Howard and how great a fit OJ Howard would be on the Packers. Like, OJ Howard would be way better than Jimmy Graham. Like, I'm sure he can get open, and he's just underused at Tampa Bay because Arians doesn't use tight ends that much. Like, OJ Howard would be perfect at the Packers, but now I know that the Packers have not even considered trying to get him. But if they did get OJ Howard, like, that would resolve some of this to me. It would make it right. But they're not going to do that because they're really, really, really incompetent and stupid. Like, the level of stupid, I don't know that we consider how quickly we need to get these people out of there and get somebody smart. Like, the Bucks have good management, the Brewers have good management, the Badgers have good management. The Packers is by far the worst management, has been that way forever of any team in the state. Like, they're just sending out somebody's dad to the combine because they're limited, they're small time, the Green Bay Packers. Like, we're up in the Great White North. where there's barely any civilization. Oh, isn't that crazy how we managed to get an NFL team when we only have a city of 100,000 people? Because that is why you can't get CeeDee Lamb, because of your imagination of yourself, your self-concept, that you're like oh, Lambeau Field, the Packer Hall of Fame. CeeDee Lamb isn't going to fit in here. Odell Beckham isn't going to fit in here. Too flashy, too good, too talented, too abrasive, too controversial. You're not going to get somebody controversial. Packers don't want anybody controversial. Besides that, they make controversial decisions by being terrible at their job. Okay, but that ESPN broadcast, like, we can't deliver all the hate to the Packers because it was really enjoyable actually watching the draft, seeing how nauseating ESPN is, like, in their attempts to. Kirk Herbstreit has turned into a nonsense man who says nonsense things that are in line with Disney's vision. He's just a Disney pawn. He's just a Disney robot. You see the smile painted on his face in those Home Depot commercials. Like, he is screaming on the inside. Like, he's just, there's nothing he can do. He's just a puppet for them. I mean, all of those people are just puppets for Disney, saying what Disney wants them to say. And you know what? What's a defensive end from Auburn like? Don't sell me on it. Even though you're ESPN, you're going to tell me that somebody from Auburn is the best defensive end in the draft. Like, don't sell me on a defensive player from Auburn. And if you're an NFL team, don't draft a defensive player from Auburn unless you're the Packers, because that's the first step for you. That's like a minor step you can take in the right direction. Why don't you draft a defensive player from Auburn or LSU? Or Georgia? Why don't you draft a defensive player from Georgia rather than do what you did? Like, that would be a rational. I guess that's the compromise I would have to ask for. Like, it'd be too much to ask for a receiver. Why don't you just draft a defensive player or an offensive lineman from Georgia? Why don't you draft an offensive lineman besides that you desperately need a linebacker and desperately need a receiver? You could use some offensive lineman, and you just lost Brian Buliga. Why don't you draft some offensive lineman from Auburn, like the standard guy that's there for you? They're idiots. They're really, really stupid, because they're not creative enough to think that the Packers can have a different look of an offense. They're not creative enough. They're not willing to take the risk enough to see the Packers as something that they're not familiar with already. That they're like, oh, the Packers have to be like the Packers were last year. They don't care about making the Packers better for the future. They're just like, they're conservatives. They're just preserving trying to preserve the way that the Packers are. But they're not, because now they're just like, oh, new regime. Who knows? There's no thought that goes into that decision. They're not planning for a future where they surround Jordan Love with great players. You're not, because you already have a great quarterback that you're not surrounding with players. They don't have a plan. They just drafted. They just made a terrible decision, and they will continue to make terrible decisions as long as whoever. Like, I want to make the decisions, but any fan can say that, and also I would trust any average fan over whoever, like somebody who watches the games or is concerned about the team's outlook or what direction the team is headed. And I know that that's stupid and exaggerated to say that a fan could do it better, and like that you make an hour-long rant is like, do you think you can do the job better? Well, it's like, if if they can do the job better, like all the stuff that doesn't involve drafting a player, because there's obviously a lot of shit that goes into being that, and it's a difficult job. Like, if they can do it better than me, then they need to create a new position they need to create a new position for somebody to just be in charge of drafting and evaluating players. And then I would take over that new position. Because if they can do the job better than me, then the only thing that they're doing better than me is that extracurricular thing. And they definitely need a new position to handle making your team better and acquiring talent. You don't know how to acquire talent. You don't know. So yes, I could do that job better as long as I'm talking about the position of drafting the players, but anybody could. Anybody could. That's your worst possible in that situation. Like, that's the stupidest decision besides trading up to 15th to get Jordan Love. The stupidest decision you could conceivably do that we could conceive you to do is trade somebody to get Jordan Love. Like, the hour rant to talk about the Packers. I love it. I love the Packers, like, terribleness that it gets to this point. I wouldn't have done this podcast if it wasn't for them picking Jordan Love. Anybody else that they picked, it would have been like, okay, but this is just anybody can do their job better than them. Really, it's not an exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration to talk about their stupidity and the level at which it persists. Their stupidity is endearing. It perseveres. Their stupidity perseveres against all odds, against everybody saying, get a receiver. Like, I thought that we were about to get one. I thought that we were all on the same page here. But the front office, stupidly, like, who knew that was even coming? Nobody thought, like, that they would imagine. I mean, they pretty much just took in the consensus among people making mock drafts that didn't put them, like, bad mock drafts. Like, general public opinion got back to them about what the Packers are going to take at 30, and general public opinion is like, oh, they might take a quarterback, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess that, because that fits in with their narration of themselves because they've done that before. They're like, well, we are the Packers and we do take a quarterback in the 20s because that's what we've done and we've been successful at it. When you have no plan to make that work, when it's just something that you're trying to repeat, you're just trying to replicate something that happened before. That's why it's unimaginative, because you're just saying, like, this is what we would do in this situation. You're relying entirely on, it's entirely out of your control, Packers front office. You're not saying that you have a direction to take anything. You're saying that general consensus is that we take a quarterback because that's what people understand us to do in this situation. Because general consensus of people making mock drafts are like, well, what do the Packers do here? They get a quarterback, and, like, some people were projecting that the Packers get a quarterback, but anybody who is a fan of the NFL that's, like, making a real mock draft, like, the more realistic mock drafts projected the Packers to get a wide receiver because they were recognizing the Packers to be, like, a real NFL team when they made these mock drafts, the same way other NFL teams are NFL teams. And they're like, well, the Packers at least know themselves to be a real NFL team, and so they're smart enough to at least get the best wide receiver on the board. So they're like, but I mean, they'll have to change the way that they project the Packers in the future, because the Packers are at the point where they don't care about the value of a draft pick. In short, fuck the Packers. And Kirk Herbstreit is a nonsense man now. Kirk Herbstreit's a nonsense man. They have all those other scrubs. Kirk Herbstreit's the only guy who's going to inject something funny every now and then, or actually make fun of how shitty the broadcast is. Everybody else is too afraid of Disney to say that, but Kirk Herbstreit is still gonna try to control the narration and say whatever it is that he's saying about how great, like, and Disney is, like, I mean, Disney's inability to produce a sporting event is the reason why the broadcast was so terrible, because Disney doesn't Disney doesn't care about a competitive natured sporting event enough to do it well. Besides that, it was a poor broadcast. Just the entire format of it was bad. Like that, like you didn't have any realistic fan reactions, lessened the impact of the draft right out of the gate. That there's no, like, their whole deal was that they're booing the commissioner for, like, while the commissioner is making the picks, and they're like, oh, we're going to have the fans on the screen behind him boo him while he's making the picks, but they were all just cheering. They weren't booing. They were cheering for him, and all the fans on the screen behind Roger Goodell, for the fans of each team that was making the draft pick at the time as Roger Goodell was announcing it, they were all just cheering it regardless of who was picked, and there wasn't any reaction of the fans to like what the pick was, which is a lot of the draw of the draft already. Is that, I mean, and I know you can fill a room full of people or anything, but you could have had those people react angrily or something, and just that the players, whatever they were telling the players' families to do is just despicable, because they weren't, obviously all the families were having trouble enjoying the moment, because Disney wanted to make it about themselves and about whatever exact way they wanted the image to come across. That's that. Bye. So that's that, and whatever next time. Probably won't talk about the Packers until the season starts or whatever. So that's that, and goodbye.